This video is a supplement to an episode I made last year entitled MLP Fan Theories. It's not required viewing for this video, but I will clarify and elaborate upon several of the opinions raised in the last several minutes of that video. I have never chosen my words more carefully than I have in the next 20 minutes. Last year I made a video about some of the most prevalent fan theories in the MLP franchise. It's still my most viewed video by a decent margin, and that sucks, because in the last chapter of that video, without telling anyone, I decided it would be cool and good to take a hard right turn while talking about ships to wax poetic on the nature of proof and media criticism, resulting in at least 100 comments assuming that I had somehow forgotten that Pinkie Pie walks in with her child in the series finale of Friendship is Magic. And while a few of you could have been a little nicer about it, I understand that communication is a two-way street. I picked a terrible spot to shift topics, and I'm willing to take 100% of the blame for the miscommunication and for explaining my thoughts as poorly as I did. That was completely my bad. Consider this a clarification of those opinions, as well as an opportunity to give some of those ideas more room to breathe. There's a lot going on in the final episode of Friendship is Magic. That's pretty natural for a series finale, which has to neatly wrap up its story and characters in the span of an episode, even more so when it has to make room for a time jump like the last problem does. As a result, more than a few details are only briefly shown or alluded to, ranging from the blindingly obvious to a few that require some interpretation on the part of the viewer. So a couple weeks ago, I put out a survey with a list of 16 statements relating to Friendship is Magic and asked all 800 respondents to simply check off the ones they considered true statements. For example, the most widely held belief on the survey, and the only one that cracked 90%, was the one that claimed Applejack's parents were dead at the start of the series at 90.8%. Even though it was left super ambiguous, I think the implication was pretty strong that they were at least out of the picture, and that TV trope about how kids shows never say die was likely in full effect on this one. I made this survey partially because I wanted some actual data on where the fandom stood on some key issues, but mostly to prove the first of 2 points that I want to make in this video that I failed to properly convey last year. When it comes to interpretations of media, creating a piece of art that can only be interpreted in one specific way by everyone who consumes it is way harder than you might think. It can be really alluring to feel like you have a piece of media figured out, and that you know what all the right answers are to a movie or show you just watched. But unless things are literally spelled out for the audience, like Big Mac and Sugar Bell are married because we literally watched their wedding ceremony, getting an entire fan base to agree on the same interpretation of a scene or a shot or even a single side glance is a much bigger ask than a lot of people realize. I'll tell you the thought process I go through in my head when I look at these questions, but you might have a different interpretation, and that's totally okay. When two parties are having an argument, it's understood that the two of you are there to discuss the topic at hand, consider each other's arguments, and change your mind if presented with convincing enough evidence. For example, my artist buddy Ed might say Spitfire is the best flyer, and I might respond, no, Dash is the best flyer. We might go back and forth for a while, but then Ed might say, yeah, but Spitfire did the Dizitron in 4.1 parsecs, to which I would respond, damn, you're right, Spitfire is the best flyer. The specific arguments in that example aren't important, but we both came into the argument ready to hear each other's points and change our mind if necessary. This is what's known in ethics discourse as arguing in good faith. It's a way broader term coined by French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, but I'm choosing to use this specific narrower use of the term for the purpose of this video. On the other hand, arguing in bad faith is a catch-all term for someone coming into an argument not being honest about this unspoken agreement to hear out the person you're arguing with. In that last example, I might be accused of arguing in bad faith if, say, I was using arguments I don't personally believe myself, if I found myself unwilling to let go of my closely held belief that Dash was the best flyer in the face of some kind of overwhelming evidence, or if I was being dishonest about my motivations, like if Dash paid me 10 bits last night to argue for her. By the way, I know it sounds like I'm going absolutely nowhere with this, but just hang with me. To illustrate this in action, let me tell you about the Sprout test, my personal barometer when it comes to deciding if I believe in an interpretation. As I go over the questions from this survey, Sprout's job is to be a complete and total contrarian and refute every piece of evidence I bring up, no matter how convincing. Generally, in my experience, I would consider an interpretation valid, or canon for a different, more loaded term, if Sprout can't argue against me without sounding like he's arguing in bad faith. It's hard to pin down in words, but I'll show you what I mean with some examples. And just so we're crystal clear, the evidence I'm going to bring up for each of these isn't exhaustive. I'm leaving out additional pieces of evidence because proving or disproving these interpretations isn't the point of this video. Let's start with a really obvious one, and the worst example I could have possibly chosen for the original video. One of the questions on the survey read, at the end of the last problem, Pinkie Pie and Cheese Sandwich are in a committed romantic relationship. Haley found something out about Pinkie Pie at the end of the series. You want to tell everybody about it?
I did! baby cheese!
I believe this, as do almost 90% of all the participants who took the survey, a number that I'm shocked wasn't at least 95% judging by all the comments I got in the last video, but let's you, me, and Sprout take a look at some of the evidence.
Sorry I'm late, but it is so hard to find a sitter with a sense of humor for Lil Cheese.
For myself and a vast majority of fans, this was more than enough confirmation. She's taking care of a kid, presumably named after Cheese Sandwich, and they and Cheese have the same coat color. That's nothing, people name their kids after close friends all the time. And she could have settled down with some other yellow pony, to which a large majority of you would probably give him the stink eye, but let's keep going. Later, Lil Cheese gets picked up from Sugar Cube Corner by Pinky and Cheese practically spooning as they park Pinky's fully grown best boy outside. Sprout might respond with, nah, Cheese could just be coming along while she picked up her kid. She's probably gonna drop him off at his house after this. For me, that is the point where I would call horseshit. At this point, it doesn't feel like Sprout can be arguing in good faith with all these weird what-if scenarios he keeps bringing up. I'm comfortable agreeing with this interpretation because refuting the evidence involves that person twisting themselves into knots to make their argument work. One question asked viewers whether they believed in Fluttercord, one of the romantic pairs alluded to by virtue of being in the same frame together in the final episode. 54.6% of respondents agreed with this interpretation, which is honestly about where I expected it to be. The two pieces of evidence that I see repeatedly for this are the fact that he made her lunch, something they've been doing repeatedly in the back half of the series, and this line from Angel Shy in one of the final episodes.
I talk to animals, I want to marry Discord.
Your list is over there.
I understand that they live together, and Angel probably knows her pretty well, but Sprout and I have talked it over, and we don't think hearsay from this little bird is exactly the most reliable judge of character in the series after the giant greedy pain in the ass he was over the last decade. Another question asked whether Vinyl Scratch and Octavia Melody were dating when we found out they lived together in the fan service heavy slice of life, and I'm shocked to find that less than 28% of people believe in this, given how much attention they got from fans in the before times, prior to my joining the fandom. Here's your second reminder, by the way, that the point of this video is not to prove or disprove any of these points, just to point out that there's not clear agreement on any of these. I also asked if there was anything to read into regarding Sambar and Yona showing up at Carousel Boutique during the final song. 37.3% took this to mean that they were dating, most likely bolstered by the only heartwarming scene from She's All Yak, but somewhat surprisingly, even more survey takers, 42.3%, interpreted them to be working at Carousel Boutique, which I can sympathize with. Almost 90% of viewers subscribed to Lyra and Bon Bon being a thing at the end of the series, a number that, again, I'm shocked isn't north of 95% after the blink and you'll miss it shots of both their engagement and their wedding in the final 4 episodes. Well, I just thought they found these cool rings and wanted to show each other. Besides, you can't even read most of the words on that newspaper. Dude, shut up. This is one of those cases where Sprout's counter-argument sounds especially silly, and possibly one of the unfortunate causes of bad faith arguments that I sometimes see floating around, when people's prejudices can color their interpretation of media. One of my favorite things to make fun of when I joined the herd were these compilations of decade-old memes shouting in frustration that fans were headcanoning Dash as a lesbian. She's a big girl, and she can make her own decisions, but I find it difficult to believe that some fans were getting that mad over something so inconsequential without having some sort of thorn in their paw about the underlying issue. Gator Gulch has always been an LGBT-friendly zone, so I can't say I really relate to that sentiment. A similar energy surrounds Aunt Holiday and Auntie Lofty, Scootaloo's two aunts from The Last Crusade, whom 71.9% of viewers believe to be in a committed romantic relationship together. That is way lower than I thought it would be, probably due to them being one-episode characters in one of the last episodes of the series that some viewers might not be all that familiar with, but it also wasn't helped by some of the noticeably restrained language in the text of the show regarding their living situation. Michael Vogel, who designed Holiday and Lofty with fellow writer Nicole Dubuque, confirmed on Twitter that Scoot's aunts are indeed a couple, the positive representation of which is a big reason The Last Crusade is one of only a few episodes that got its own Wikipedia article. I love that, but it's another example of a different issue that some people push back on for entirely different reasons, whose explanation I'm going to try not to butcher. There's an idea presented back in the 60s by French literary theorist Roland Barthes called Death of the Author. It's a complex idea that I can't get fully into without grinding this video to a complete standstill, but the extremely simplified version goes that we shouldn't give special weight to any comments the creator of a work makes about their own work just because they wrote it, either because a reader, listener, or viewer should let the text of a work speak for itself, because of the belief belief that the creator of a world has no agency over a story after it's written, or even the slightly cynical claim that if they meant that to be the case, they would have put it in the story to begin with. It's a really complex idea that a lot of people like to argue back and forth on, but if you're interested, Lindsay Ellis has a pretty good essay on the topic that I've linked to in the description of this video. The first example that comes to mind is author and questionable human being J.K. Rowling's penchant for providing inconsequential bits of lore about the Harry Potter franchise long after the fact, but I also have a pony example prepped in the oven as well, so you can see what I mean. Back in 2013, about a month before season 3 wrapped, a bewildered Twitter user was dying to know what Equestrian Toilets looked like and asked Friendship is Magic creator Lauren Faust about it directly. 90 minutes later, Lauren returned with her view. There are no toilets in Equestria. They are horses. They poop on the ground and fertilize the flowers. This sparked enough discussion amongst the fanbase that the interaction eventually got its own entry on Equestria Daily. The replies were all over both sides of the debate when it came to death of the author. Some happily accepted her word as gospel, while others were quick to call her out as an obvious troll. Many people were quick to point out contradictions with the available episodes, most notably the outhouse from the last roundup. Others provided their own more colorful interpretations of what happens when ponies do their business, and one commenter even got upset at Lauren for talking about horse poop at all. So now I'll pose the question to you, the viewer. How much do you trust Lauren's information here on the subject? It's clearly a very polarizing question to the audience of a decade ago, especially given the contentious topic of authorship at a time when she was considered the creator of Friendship is Magic, but no longer actively writing on the show. The concept of authorial intent gets even murkier when we consider the ending interpretations of one of the fandom's most popular ships.
Maybe we could get to places on time if you let me do some of the chores instead of always doing everything yourself. Maybe I would if you did them the right way.
According to my survey, exactly 2/3 of viewers believe in the interpretation of this scene that Applejack and Rainbow Dash are a couple. Well, we don't know that, they probably just live together. And for once, I can see where Sprout's coming from. In an actual in-the-wild example of one of the creators exercising death of the author, Jim Miller is on record regarding Appledash and Fluttercord in the finale that, quote, certain things were left deliberately ambiguous for you guys to deliberate and have fun with. Similarly, another piece of evidence that I've seen people bring up involves this piece of fan art of Jack and Dash at their wedding that their voice actress Ashley Ball posted on Instagram for World Pride Day back in 2014. Very cute, but I'd like to bring up something that I feel to be an important detail here. With the special exception of the show's landmark 200th episode, for which the main voice acting cast received a writer credit, Ashley Ball was not credited as a writer on the show and didn't contribute to the story of the series on paper. I did get some pushback from this in a comment I'm too lazy to go screen grab that suggested that Ashley was close enough to the writers during production that she likely overheard some of the team's true intentions regarding this issue. I'm pretty iffy on that theory, but I can also appreciate the gray subtextual area where even though a VA contributes nothing to the story on paper, their performances can often lend quite a bit of characterization under the surface based on how they deliver their lines. Here's your hourly reminder that I'm not here to prove or disprove anything, just to show you the complete lack of community consensus on these matters. Also, if you're still here, thank you. I know this is kind of a dry subject, but it really means a lot that 800 of you took my survey. One last note about death of the author. There was a remark made by Jim Miller regarding the Trixie-like magician in Granny's Gone Wild, stating that he was put there in the story in case they ever wanted to do an episode down the road about Trixie's parental situation, a story that we now know the television series never got to. Almost 75% of viewers believe in this one, and I have no problem with that, but it does highlight some of the weird constraints regarding author intention. What does it say about a theory when the writer says, maybe we thought about possibly making him Trixie's father down the road? What does that even mean in this context? A few of the survey questions were specifically included because they were left ambiguous for a variety of reasons. One of them just read, Twilight's parents are married, which 88.1% of fans agreed with. There really wasn't any gotcha moment to this one. I just wanted to see how people would respond to something that both wasn't confirmed in the series to my knowledge and had literally zero impact on the story. I think most people just assumed most couples with kids would be married, since we got to see 4 different weddings over the course of the series. I probably don't have to say this, but I'm not at all surprised that this didn't come up in the show. As I said back in the original fan theories video, it's really cumbersome and silly to think that everything needs to be stated outright in order for it to be legit. Hey everyone, these are my married parents. Sorry I'm late, I couldn't find a babysitter for my child, Little Cheese, who I conceived with my husband, Cheese Sandwich. I'm sorry, Apple Bloom, I just can't let you stay home alone. As you know, that's what killed our parents 2 years ago to the day before Twilight came to Ponyville. For the same reason, 75% of fans believe that the Apple sisters' choice of wardrobe in the finale is an effective signal to the viewer that Granny Smith and Goldie Delicious are both deceased after the time jump, though it probably helps the interpretation that both of them were already getting up there in years during the bulk of the series. My favorite responses, though, were were those to the question of whether Applejack and Pinkie Pie are actually related. Not because the responses are an almost perfect 50-50 split, but because multiple commenters on the survey immediately drilled the correct answer that it absolutely does not matter. Not only doesn't it matter, it was left intentionally vague as an Aesop about found family and the people who matter to you being more than just a bloodline. 81.4% of respondents believe that the Cake twins are actually Mr. and Mrs. Cake's biological children, the remainder of which believe in a fan theory that, as far as I know, is only propped up by Mr. Cake's comically shifty eyes in the nursery and baby cakes. A little over a quarter of people believe that Twilight's student Lusterdawn is the child of Starlight Glimmer and Sunburst, and in writing this, I can see where they're coming from when you put them side by side, but I personally need something more than just mane and coat color in an episode where her possible father doesn't even have a speaking role. But again, I cannot be more clear on this. The point of this video was not to prove or disprove any of these ideas. Theory crafting should be fun and inclusive, and policing others based on an interpretation you know to be correct can feel kinda short-sighted and gatekeepy, something I've definitely been guilty of in the past. So if you want to write a slice of life marital story about Starburst, just make sure you send me a copy. I want to read it when you're done. I saved the pettiest question on the survey for last though, and it's one that requires a bit of backstory. Earlier this year, I got into an argument on Twitter with someone who had a unique interpretation of the Sonic Rainboom that I had never heard before. He was of the opinion that the reason Rainbow Dash was able to do the Sonic Rainboom at all was because her mane and tail were also rainbow colored, based on this shot of her looking over her shoulder to see a rainbow forming out of her tail. This is all a fine idea, save for two problems I had with it. First was this gross feeling that the Rainboom being tied to mane color kind of sells short all the training and effort Dash put in to make the Rainboom happen in the first place. The second was just how sure he seemed to be on the matter, as he continued to insist pretty strongly during our discussion that this was the obvious and only interpretation, an idea which I hadn't even considered until that moment. I had some space on the survey, and according to all of you, only 21% of you subscribed to that idea. Again, I'm not using a populist argument to prove myself right, I'm using a silly survey to show that this interpretation is far from a sure thing. The survey itself wasn't exactly perfect either. Despite trying my best to assure people that none of the statements were trick questions, a few of them were phrased in such a silly way that some of you couldn't help but treat them as tongue-in-cheek. I also apologize for half of them being ship questions, but that's just what presses people's buttons as a hot-button issue in this fandom. I also didn't consider that some viewers just aren't that into romance in their media, and didn't really give any of the relationship aspects of the show the time of day. You'll also notice that this episode didn't once mention comic books or any other supplementary material outside the TV show, and that is absolutely by design. The survey question was already a nightmare to word in a way that was as unambiguous and easy to parse as possible. Last month, I asked viewers if they considered the comic books to be in the same continuity as the TV show, and 1 week and 7 dozen comments later, I don't believe there's any fan consensus on that issue either. And if there is an official ruling on the matter, it's absolutely not widely known information. You can argue about that issue in the comments if you want, but not only is that not really the point of all this, I also don't really find the answer to that question very interesting. So why did I do all this? Partially because my college roommate was a philosophy major and I wanted to make that everyone's problem, but also because I've started to notice a troubling trend when it comes to people engaging with media at large that sticks in my craw a little bit, and I wanted to elaborate on that. When I made my video about Rainbow Dash's relationship with substance abuse when it came to cider, there were already multiple game theory style think pieces out there attempting to use research and evidence to come to a definitive yes or no answer to binary questions like, is Rainbow Dash an alcoholic, or is the cider in the show alcoholic? Those are interesting questions, sure, but I felt like the discussions they were generating were getting in the way of more nuanced discussions about the depiction of addiction in media I cared about. Discussion that I thought my experience as a recovering alcoholic could lend some context and texture to. And yet, without fail, I had multiple people comment without watching the video that it's actually not complicated. Such and such already dismissed this in their video. Nothing left to talk about. That issue has been resolved. And being dismissed out of hand by someone because they think the issue I want to add to isn't worth exploring anymore feels bad. It's a more pronounced version of the vague, uneasy feeling I had when I was part of the Five Nights at Freddy's fandom. They're a wonderful, passionate bunch, and I don't regret my time there one bit, but I started to see a noticeable slant in the fandom's interest towards things that had definite answers, things that could be solved, either from a gameplay perspective, how to beat Night 6, activating an infinite flashlight glitch, or discovering all the hidden Easter eggs, or on the story side. Why are these machines trying to kill the player? Who is Phone Guy? Who did the bite of 87?
Was that the bite of 87?
It comes up pretty regularly regularly whenever Markiplier streams a new Five Nights game, where people in the chat will try to help him by telling him the current best light-flicking, camera-checking strategy of the game he's playing, instead of letting him experience the game at his own pace as the developer intended. I'm really trying to choose my words carefully here, because I don't want it to come off like I'm saying that people are enjoying media wrong. You can enjoy something any way you want, but I will gently suggest that you might get more out of the shows you watch, the games you play, or the books you read if you try not to treat them like a worksheet, a list of answers that go in a series of blanks. Behind most of the survey questions I pose, there's all kinds of really interesting open-ended questions to explore that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. Questions like, what's the difference between friendship and love? What does love mean to a 1,000-year-old near-immortal being? Is it weird that a mortal dates the god of chaos? Is it weird if two roommates date? What kind of crisis would Dash have if she found out the only reason she could do the sonic rain boom was because of her hair color? How does Dash being addicted to cider impact her life and personality? What are Equestria's attitudes about interspecies dating? What does Cozy Glow getting turned to stone say about a child's capacity for evil? Those are the kinds of questions I get the most enjoyment out of answering, and they can be really exciting to look at if you're willing to tackle questions that don't have obvious answers. I'm not here to come to conclusions. I'm just here to talk about ponies with you. Thanks a lot for watching. I was really worried about doing this episode for a long time since it's kind of a dry topic, and the first Fan Theories episode was such a sore spot for me, but I'm happy to be able to elaborate on my initial point, and I'm pumped to have over 800 people willing to take my survey. This was a lot of fun to make, and I'll definitely be finding excuses to do more survey-based videos in the future. It might also be time for a Fan Theory sequel video, since I came across a few more from this survey alone. Let me know if that's something you might be into, and I'll be back in a few weeks with something more fun. Until next time, I'm some horse on the internet. Thanks for watching.